Good morning and welcome to Waddy Christian Church. So glad. Let us go to God in prayer. Gracious and loving Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day. We ask that you be with us as we gather in this place, helping us to remember your mighty works and all the good deeds that you have done for us. Be with us as we worship this day, that we may continue to learn and grow in our understanding of you, and that we may share you wherever we go. In your holy name, O God, we pray. Okay, we are in the book of Acts today. We're just following the story from last week. Last week we heard the story about the Holy Spirit landing on the disciples and those gathered there so they could share the good works of God. And then Peter goes into a sermon. And this is what follows that little piece. So we're going to start at verse 41, even though the section will begin at 42. Okay. So it says, those who accepted his message were baptized, and about 3,000 were added to their number that day. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to the fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe, and many wonders and miraculous signs were done by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common. Selling their possessions and goods, they gave to anyone as he had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. So kind of interesting, this week I was watching a little documentary thing on church and church growth, and somebody once equated the church to a football huddle. You think about a football huddle, if you ever watch football, they huddle together, you know that something important is being said, but you don't get to hear it, you don't understand it, it's words that don't make sense to you, and all you see is their rear ends. That's the church. In all fairness, it's hard to talk about God to a world that is so desperately needed. When we speak of his mystery, words just seem to fail. There's just not words big enough to describe how much he does and who he is. How do we find words to describe that being, that deep experience that is so often, indescribable? We take Luke, for instance. Now, Luke is the writer of Acts, and he tells us about the day of Pentecost, which we heard about last Sunday. Jews from every nation were gathered in one place. They must have had trouble understanding one another because even though they all shared the same faith, they were separated by different languages and cultures. Well, the Spirit descends, and people begin to talk, and people begin to hear, and people in the room said, "How is it possible that I am able to hear and understand you, even though I speak a very different language?" It's a miracle of miracles. Now, earlier in Luke's Gospel, there's a part in which Jesus is accused of being a glutton and a wine bibber. I think it was really, what kind of insult is that, right? Well, the crowd outside the streets who are not a part of this miracle taking place, those disciples and Jesus are doing the same thing they did when Jesus was with them. They're just drunk. This isn't important. This isn't a miracle. So Peter comes out to preach. Peter? Now let's remind ourselves of the story of what Peter is before all this takes place, right? We remember where we left Peter at the end of Luke's Gospel. Peter had been a preeminent disciple. He was the one that so boldly speak at the Last Supper that even though everybody else deserts you and falls away, I will be right behind you, Jesus, when the going gets rough. Well, what happens? When the going gets rough, Peter is behind Jesus. Way behind Jesus. Like the other disciples, he has run away into the darkness. Later that night, when the maid questions Peter, "Weren't you with the Galileans? Don't you know this man? Aren't you one of his followers?" Peter denies knowing Jesus not once, not twice, but 3 times. He says, "Nope, I don't know him. Got nothing to do with him." Out there in the middle of the night, when questioned by a humble servant girl, Peter could not find himself to say the words, "Yes, I am with Jesus." Which makes it all the more amazing to me where we find Peter in today's story. There he is, out on the street where everybody can see, speaking to the crowd. Peter, the one who never seemed to get the answer right when Jesus asked the questions, Peter, the one who could only say, I didn't even know the man, when asked by a maid in the courtyard. And now it's Peter who stands up to preach to a crowd. And it must have been an incredible sermon, copying in a grand total of 3 minutes of reading. And yet, the text that follows is this. Those who accepted his message, this bold and crazy sermon, were baptized, and 3,000 were added to their numbers that day. Now that is a sermon, if ever there was a sermon. They devoted themselves, it says, to the apostles' teaching and to the fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe and many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts, and they broke bread together in their homes, and they ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people, and the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. What a great little piece of our history as a church. So, you know how I like to do little word plays. You have to learn new things each week. The Greek word used for devoted in verse 42 can be translated as to endure or to continue to do something with effort. I want you to think about that for a minute. To endure or to continue to do something with effort. In other words, if something is trivial in value, it doesn't require devotion or effort. Nobody really says, I devoted myself to eat that entire plate of nachos. Nobody says, it's amazing how she devotes herself to binge watch every Hallmark Christmas movie. Those things are pleasurable and easy. They don't require discipline or sacrifice, and they don't yield any great rewards either. We devote ourselves to things that are challenging, that carry high value in our lives. We devote ourselves to relationships. We devote ourselves to some achievements, like completing a project or a personal development goal, like learning a new skill. We devote ourselves to the most important things in life, to the things with lasting value. Devotion requires commitment and humility and self-sacrifice. And that's what these early Christians did to create a healthy church, a healthy community that reflected the Spirit of Jesus Christ. They devoted themselves to the most important priorities that Jesus had taught them: prayer, praising God, learning, sharing meals together, sacrificial generosity, and caring relationships. This new community they created was so radically inviting that our final verse reads, and the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. I think perhaps we can learn something from that church. What do you think? There's a story about a history teacher who just about a week before school was getting ready to start, fell off a step ladder and hurt his back. Doctor kind of talked to him and says, we don't have to do surgery, but I do want to wrap you in a cast. I just think it's going to be the best thing to kind of keep that back stabilized and get you back on the field or, back in life better. So he does. So he puts this full body cast around his midsection there, and that's what he's going to have to wear as he teaches in the high school for a number of weeks. So he doesn't want anyone to know that he has this, so he decides to put on a whole shirt and tie, whole 9 yards. He's going to do the whole suit thing to school. And he gets in there and he's setting up everything and he opens up the window because it's hot. We know a little bit about that this morning, right? And as he's sitting there and he's teaching, this gust of wind comes through and his tie keeps getting flown in front of his face. And without thinking, he takes a stapler and just staples it to himself. All the students' eyes get about this big because they don't know he's got a cast. Now all of a sudden, these kids who, up until this point, have been out of control. They are the problem kids. They are the ones that nobody else wanted. They're stuck in his class. Now they're all sitting up with attention and ready to focus. If you do that to him, what is he going to do to us? Right? Well, by the time he figured out what had happened, he was too embarrassed to correct the mistakes. And by the time the students figured out what had happened, they were already getting accolades for paying attention, for doing what they were supposed to do. They were already being better students in other classes and already having better things being built for them. And they didn't want to lose out. So they did what we are called to do in this text. They committed themselves fully, even when it was challenging. There's a fascinating Greek word buried in verse 46 of this passage, which reads, "Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people." That little word sincere there comes in. In this verse, it's actually a compound word in Greek. It's made up of two words, and philos, meaning not, and rocky ground. Not rocky ground, that's where it comes from. It refers to removing obstacles or complications from someone's path. This word is only used one time in the whole of the New Testament, and it's not found in any other ancient writings of the time, except for the writing referring to this early church. It appears to be a brand new word made up just to describe this early group of people following Jesus' words. So what does it mean? All right. It means that they worked to remove any prejudices, any barriers, any divisions in their heart and mind that would keep them from the complete unity in Jesus Christ. So what stones do they remove from their path? Perhaps the stones of religious squabbles and fruitless debates, the stones of prejudice and superiority and greed and self-centeredness and status. And in doing so, they cause outsiders to see this awesome truth, this presence of a living God in their midst. I feel like perhaps there is something today's church can learn from this passage and the world around us, especially when you consider the biggest deterrent of Christ for the world is the church. More times than not. I think about the teacher who every year they knew when they get into his class, he'd do these elaborate seating charts. And if you've ever done a seating chart, you know how complicated they can be. But he always left one chair empty. It was always in the middle, it was always on the side, whatever it was. But he purposely always set it up so there was one chair empty, but included in the room. And as the time went on, of course, kids would try to sit there. No, your seat's over there. No, your seat's over here. This seat is reserved. We're going to leave it reserved. And as time went on, he would tell the story about when he was a child. When he was a child, he had a good friend. There was about 3 or 4 of them that all ran around and did stuff together. And they would go to each other's houses and they would play and do all those kinds of things. And it was not uncommon for them to stay at different places. Well, the one friend, a very wealthy friend, had a party. And they were invited to this party. And they were so excited. They talked about it all the way there, what kind of cake they were going to have, what kind of ice cream they were going to have, what kind of dancing they were going to do, whatever it was, the whole way over there. Up the elevator they go to this friend's apartment. The mom opens the door and says, well, I'm sorry guys, didn't know you guys were coming. Oh yeah, he invited us. Well, okay, well you can come in, but you, the teacher, you can't come because there's not enough chairs for you. And he thought, that's kind of weird. I've been in that place. I know there are plenty of chairs. I've sat in all of them. And then it hit him. My skin is a different color than theirs. And now it's a public party. So maybe I don't have a place there when it's public that I had when it's private. So when he began to teach school, when he began to work with these groups, he thought, you know what? I need to make sure there's always a seat for every single kid. I need to make sure there's a place for every single person. No matter what they look like, no matter what they think like, no matter what they say or they do. I need to make sure that they have an invitation to be a part of the group. So he made that little, and so there's always just an empty chair, an empty spot for whoever that would be. I think the church could learn a thing or two about the world from that also. There's another story about these two schools are going to play football against each other. One is a Christian school, got a great set of boosters. I mean, they got money, they got love, they got all the support and parents you can think of. They're at 7-1 odds. I mean, they are doing great throughout the school year. They've won all their games. They're ready to go. The other one is kind of from a juvenile detention kind of thing. They come in, they're 0-8. They don't have any kind of parental support. Most of them don't even know both their parents. They don't have the booster clubs. They don't have the teachers. They don't have the coaches. They've got one coach, and he's sometimes there and sometimes not. It's not a good situation. So the Christian school, the Lions, of course, you're going to have a Christian school. That's where you're going to name yourself, right? The Lions decide, you know what? We're going to do something for this other school that we would not normally do. We're going to be their fans. So they send out a letter to all the parents and say, look, some of you need you to come and be supportive and cheerleaders and fans for this other team. They need to know love and acceptance the way that our kids already know love and acceptance. So for the first time ever, here comes out these tornadoes, that's their name, in case you didn't know. Here comes out the tornadoes to cheerleaders and to cheering and to the music playing and a whole banner that they get to run through, something they had never seen before. All of a sudden, they're out there and they're making plays and there's someone that knows their name. And they're cheering for them and excited for them and doing all those kinds of things. At the end of the game, they gather together for a post-game prayer, as is the tradition of the Christian school. And one of the kids from the tornadoes raises his hand, "Can I do the prayer?" Yeah, sure. Come on. Why not? The prayer is this: Lord, I don't know how this happened, and I don't know how to say thank you. I would never have thought there were so many people who cared about us. Amen. Think about that. Think about that prayer. Who was included when you left an empty chair for the least of these? Jesus. Who won the football game against all odds, the good and bad behavior kids alike? Now, I know Flat is going to know the actual answer, but the answer is Jesus. Who benefits when we open the table to everyone? Jesus. Who triumphs when we stop being a church huddled in the corner using just our own language and start sharing God's goodness everywhere we go? Jesus. So, may it be so. Let us share. So, what obstacle can we remove that will help you grow closer to Christ? It's a question I want you to think about this day. And what challenge can we join you on in devotion to His cause in your life? Those are the two things I want you to think about as we join in our hymn of discipleship in number 393 with your verse. Let us stand together. May the Lord who makes us one go with us, opening minds, hearts, and doors, opportunities to share His mighty deeds. Amen.